Hello, everybody. This is Brian from Necronomicast. Thank you for tuning in for this exciting 13th season of the show. Couldn't do it without you. Now, if you're ever wondering if there was a kind of a fun and inexpensive way that you could support the production of the show, I've got news for you. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Necronomicast. Every time I have an author on the show, I've purchased their book. Whenever a documentary filmmaker or a creative person is on the show to talk about their project, you know I've supported their project. So if you go to buymeacoffee.com/Necronomicast, that will enable me to continue to do the work that I do here on the show. So I thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for all of the support and encouragement you've given me over the years. And you know what? If you buy me a cup of coffee at the website, I would be more than happy to deliver a personalized message to you on the show. 2 or more cups of coffee, you're going to get something in the mail. buymeacoffee.com/Necronomicast. And now, on with the show. Happy Halloween from Omaha, Nebraska, the capital city of the historic haunted heartland. My name is Brian Corey, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all, young and old, to this episode of the world-famous Necronomicast. Boy, do I have a treat for you. No tricks, faithful listeners. This episode features the return of Richard Estep to the program. He's been a paranormal investigator for over 30 years, researching claims of ghosts and hauntings on both sides of the Atlantic. He's the author of over 30 books in genres ranging from paranormal nonfiction and true crime to history and fiction. His newest book, In Search of Demons, Richard hunts down firsthand experiences and historic accounts of the most legendary demonic activity known to man. So join me and Richard Estep on this special Halloween episode of the Necronomicast. And now, friends, calling in on the Necronomicast Newsmaker Hotline, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the show paranormal investigator, writer extraordinaire, the great Richard Estep. Richard, welcome once again to the Necronomicast.
Thanks, Brian. It's always a pleasure to be on the show.
Yeah. Now, friends, if you want to listen to another great conversation with Richard that I had years ago when we got to know each other, we got to kind of trade our backgrounds back and forth. That's episode 192, if you're listening. 192 of the Necronomicast. I think it was called Paranormal Paramedic is what I think I titled that one. So it's great to have you back, Richard.
Thanks, man. It's like I said, it's always a pleasure. I love talking to you, and I love your listenership. Also, they're my kind of people.
Yeah. Like I think I've been looking over my guest lists over the past couple of years, and I must be doing something right because I've had so many guests that I just learned so much from, and I got to compliment you. I think I've learned really a lot about the paranormal investigative process from you. I really admire the way that you go about it. And I read your books, like your Villisca book, your Malvern Manor book, your Fox Hill Farm book. I love this book here, The Great American Ghost Trip, which I think was incredible. I just really like your thoughtful way that you go about these things. You don't sensationalize things, and you don't also like a skeptic debunker kind of a snobby mentality. You are just about the most open-minded investigator that I've come across, and reading your books is always such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I like the word skeptic, but I think it's been kind of hijacked and it needs to be reclaimed. I mean, skeptic in the truest sense just means these are some pretty out there claims. So what's the evidence? It's not a flat refusal to accept the potential existence of the anomalous or the uncanny.
Yeah. So I got the opportunity, and thanks to the good folks over at Llewellyn Publishing, they sent me this copy of In Search of Demons, your newest book, historic cases and firsthand experiences from experts and skeptics alike. And I tore right into it, just finished it the other day. And once again, another great Richard Estep, kind of like it's like your Great American Road Trip. Like you are going on a journey, like literally, like you travel the country in your truck, and you talk about driving here and there and investigating all these places, but it's also like a mental journey as well. So like what got you the the idea, or like what made you want to write a book that concentrated just on the concept of the demon in paranormal thinking?
Well, I think a lot of writers write the books that they want to read.
Hmm.
And so I think that it's become so tiresome, the use of the word demon in paranormal reality television, on YouTube and TikTok. There's this race to the bottom to find the most terrifying, dark, demonic location until next week, which just keeps happening and happening. And I got tired of seeing thumbnails on YouTube of people doing this,
Right.
and it's all an attempt to sensationalize. Whether you believe in demons or not, they cannot exist in the sheer quantity that some content creators would have us believe, in an attempt to get likes and clicks and upvotes and things like that, and therefore revenue. So I looked at the literature, and there was some stuff that I really liked. I love Michel Boulanger's Dictionary of Demons, for example. Michelle was gracious enough, of course, to write the foreword to this book. But the books tended to fall into one of two separate camps. Either they were outright belief, coming from a kind of theological point of view. Demons are real. We should be afraid of them, but don't worry, the church can save you. We have a team for that, And then there were the hardcore skeptics that were like, this is garbage. And if you believe this, you're a simpleton, which is hugely insulting to around half the world's population. And I looked for a book that walked that middle path, that said, so let's take a sober look at the evidence for the existence or lack thereof of the demonic. And didn't find one, so I decided I would pitch that to Llewellyn, never expecting them to say yes, quite frankly. I thought this would be a self-published book. And to my surprise, they said yes. And almost 80,000 words later is the book you hold in your hand.
Well, and it's great. Like, I didn't know what to expect. Now, I knew it was going to be good. I knew it was going to be well-researched. I knew you were going to take your time, and you really turn a phrase well. I like how you lead from one chapter to another, like it's a journey. Like I said, like it was a journey, literally you're getting in your truck and you're driving across the country to interview people, but also like the journey in your mind of examining evidence, examining stories, kind of getting to the root of, well, what's this legend, or what's this old story about? Because you go back and you retrace the steps of some of the most popular or the most infamous demonic possession cases that are in North American history. And then you examine them, and then you look for both sides. And boy, the experts that you contacted, I was just looking over the list of the experts once again. You just you must have pulled a lot of favors to get all these people to be a part of your book. But what great contributors to this concept of figuring out what is a demon.
Thank you. I think the expert, and I can already hear the sharpening of claws and people saying there are no paranormal experts. Well, in terms of experts, I consulted clinical psychologists, medical doctors. I went to the medical and the psychological realm, people with genuine credentials. I talked to a parapsychologist, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, of course. I talked to a bishop with the Old Catholic Church who performed exorcisms, a stage illusionist, clinical therapists. I really ran the gamut, a witch, a psychic medium. And they all nobody got paid to help me with this book. And, I've never written a book, Brian, that I can take sole credit for. It always takes a village, right? But in this case, people were passionate about weighing in with their perspective. So, I talked to Jason Hawes, of course, who had many years in the paranormal field, is a man who is not shy about giving his opinion at all. And they were all just willing to lay it all out there and say, here's my experience and here's my opinion. And I feel indebted to each and every one that contributed.
Absolutely. And you start off by kind of going to some of the most famous quote unquote demonologists in American culture, and that would be the Warrens. And, some people have a real, a love relationship with the Warrens, and some people can't stand them, just with their history. And yeah, that's been well documented. But you go through and in painstaking detail, once again.
Yeah, so the Warrens, love them, hate them. No one's ambivalent about them, right? Everyone has an opinion, and what you cannot deny is this huge impact that they had. One thing I noticed about the U.S., and by the way, if this book has one big Achilles heel I wish I could correct is that it is very US and European centric. I wish I'd had the time and the budget to look at Africa and other nations like that. And hopefully I'll get to do that in a future volume, because this is a global phenomenon. So if I've given it short shrift, that's it. But if you look at the kind of state of demonology in the US, one thing that's very interesting, and Jeff Belanger pointed this out to me, was that it's almost entirely focused upon the East Coast. And which is where the Warrens did so much, applied their trade, Connecticut, Amityville, and names that we all know. That part of the country has deep roots in Puritanism. It's no surprise, of course, that this is the part of the country that gave us the Salem Witch Trials and so on and so forth. So it kind of fascinated me that the further west you come through the Midwest and to the West Coast, the fewer demons you tend to run into. And so it seems that most of those quote unquote demonic locations are kind of to the eastern part of the country.
But that being said, you also you trekked your way through the Midwest. Now, I know you talked to our friend Josh Hurd, who directed you to Erling, Iowa.
Yes, the dollar store Kiefer Sutherland sent me to Erling, Iowa.
Yeah, that's right. Shout out to Josh Hurd. So in Erling, Iowa, I'm not that far away, being in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was not very familiar at all. I've heard of it, but I enjoyed reading about the case in Erling, Iowa, and it was very interesting to hear you go and investigate the Catholic Church that's in that town, and you go in and investigate. And it was interesting that there wasn't a lot of people that want to talk about it, or they're trying to forget about it. They're not really that jazzed that the town has still kind of that reputation or that kind of connection to demonic activity. But you went there and investigated, and the case in Erling, Iowa, very interesting.
And I hate to say it, I feel for the people of Erling because they're about to get a lot of interest. The last I heard, there is a movie just wrapped production about that case starring Al Pacino. And it's called, the working title was, I believe, The Ritual. So, inevitably, if you've read the section on the Erling exorcism in my book, it's going to be very much a fire and brimstone, levitating, head-turning kind of Hollywood take on this story. So the people of Erling are not going to get to be the sleepy, out-of-the-way town that they are when that movie comes out. There'll be a surge of interest in visitors. And I don't blame them at all for wanting to keep themselves to themselves. I think that the people that would talk, some of them were like, oh, this is just fairy tales, ghosts and goblins, Others were like, no, my grandparents talked about the screams coming from the convent and the noxious odors and brimstone and stuff like that. And they were deadly serious, and they wouldn't set foot over there for $100. So, there was some division of opinion. Erling is a beautiful town, friendly people, very sleepy. I don't have a good explanation for what happened there during I believe it was 1928. Perhaps this epic showdown between the forces of light and darkness took place in that building, in that convent, which has long since been demolished, but the church is still standing right there. Perhaps that happened. Perhaps a deeply psychologically troubled woman was paired up with some devout believers who, ran her through the ritual of exorcism over a prolonged period of time. It's tough to say. I don't have any definitive answers, but it fascinates me that this happened the way it did.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Then your travels took you to go visit with Johnny Hauser over at the Villisca Axe Murder House, and you wrote that masterful book about the murders in Villisca, or the haunting in Villisca, earlier a couple years ago. Great book, but like the Alney brothers talking about how they've experienced demonic things. Now, very, very funny story. When I booked a night with my friends to investigate the Villisca house, Darwin Lynn called me up and said, "Brian, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to bump you from the schedule and reschedule." And I'm like, "Oh, no, what's going on?" He's like, "Well, there's these guys on a TV show that that are coming in to film, and they're going to take that whole week or that weekend, Ghost Adventures." So when you watch that Ghost Adventures and that episode, and the attic door slams, That was supposed to be my weekend. So I see that door slam and I'm like, that was supposed to be some of my evidence. That was supposed to be something that I experienced when I.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The episode where Zach was propping an axe up and daring the ghosts to drop it on his face.
Classic Zach, daring him to drop the axe at us. Yeah, that was supposed to be my weekend.
Certainly a thing that happened.
That was a thing.
Yeah, I do love Johnny Hauser. He's a wonderful man, very, very genuine. And what struck me about Johnny's experience was that, he is a believer. He is the kind of guy that has deep spiritual faith, even if he doesn't necessarily go to church every Sunday. And he told me, you consider where he lives and works. He lives next door to that house. He works in that house all the time. He could fill a book with his own hair-raising experiences inside that house. And he told me, I'm fine with ghosts inside the Axe Murder House. That's one thing. But I don't do that demon stuff. Well, he didn't say stuff. It's Johnny. I'm sure you can. But it fascinated me. He'd had a bad experience of his own while investigating the Sally House in Atchison, Kansas, and did not want to go back there after what happened.
Yeah. Now you bring up the Sally House. Now I should have asked you before we started rolling tape. I was reading your book and I was like, boy, that sounds a lot like the Sally House. That I didn't know if you wanted to name it or not, but I guess you just did. But in the book,
I'm fine naming it. I didn't name it in print because reasons. But yeah, I mean, I've spent several nights in that house myself. I have slept there several times, and I would call the activity there, for me at least, minimal. Which isn't to say it isn't active. It isn't to say that I interviewed Deborah Pittman and Tony Pickman, and those guys are controversial. They've taken a lot of heat. But I found them both to be very credible. It's fair to say that living in that house had a profound impact on their lives, But as to whether it's a demonic case, I didn't experience anything that I would consider demonic there. However, there are occult sigils in the basement of that house, which again, I consulted with Michelle Belanger and MJ Dixon, both of whom said that, it looked as though somebody had tried to conjure something up, but it had just enough knowledge of occult practices to be dangerous.
Now, I've been in that basement. I've spent the night there myself. And the only thing I think that we might have captured was some kind of a growl. Now, if that was a hungry paranormal investigator, or if that was a stray cat or a dog outside, can't say. I'm not going to say it was demonic activity, but the story itself was very interesting. And so, yeah, but you had an interesting occurrence to your truck when you were leaving there, brand new tires, and one of them just like disintegrated on your way home. And it's luckily you weren't hurt seriously.
It did. And that house was interesting. A couple of my colleagues, Aaron and Mike, we left in the wee small hours of the morning. Nothing really was going on. They went back after 5 minutes because they realized they'd left some food in the fridge and didn't want to be bad, guests. So Mike went back in, heard a door slam, a light switched itself on upstairs in the empty house. So that house, it's almost like the house waited for him. That happened during our Great American Ghost Trip. But for me, what's kind of interesting is that I'd been warned by two separate independent friends, one on the other side of the Atlantic, that there was something negative and non-human that had glommed onto me during my current investigation. And I said, thanks very much. What can I really do about that? And a friend of mine said, well, you should probably bathe in all of the Himalayan salt you can find when you get back home. And I'm driving west out of Atchison back towards Colorado. It's a beautiful, dark, starry night. I remember distinctly listening to a podcast with Ricky Gervais, who was saying, why is it the only people abducted by aliens are driving through the middle of nowhere, Kansas at 3 a.m? And I laughed until I realized I was driving through the middle of nowhere, Kansas at 3 a.m, looking up at the stars, no UFOs. And then all of a sudden, boom, and I am out of control and off the road. And these brand new truck tires, the rear driver's side, blown, and not just blown, it was shredded. I mean, I've posted pictures of that online. It catastrophically failed. So I did take it back to the dealership, and they said, well, this is a zipper failure. The whole thing just came apart. It's extremely rare. It can happen with a manufacturing defect, but we don't really have a good explanation for it. And I'd been told by the two mediums that had contacted me that whatever was in that house did not want me leaving and telling its story. So To this day, I don't know if it was simply a statistically bad experience with a defective tire, or whether something in that house reached out and caused some mayhem.
Ah. Now, earlier you mentioned this upcoming movie with Al Pacino about the Erling, Iowa case.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting. Now, I'm kind of like, I want people to get like excited about this book. I'm not like trying to give away secrets or too much. I'm trying to give people a reason to go check it out because it's a great read. Now,
Mhm.
in pop culture, demonic activity and everything totally promoted and you're charged a fee to see it by Hollywood.
Yeah.
And you had Aaron Sagers, a great interview chat with him, talking about like the Hollywood effect, the pop culture effect of movies
Mhm.
like The Exorcist and The Ritual that's coming up, and the Russell Crowe's movies and everything.
Pope's Exorcist. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had Aaron Sagers talking about like how the concept of the demon is perpetuated by Hollywood and Hollywood producers or television producers, and kind of giving it unnecessary attention, maybe perhaps.
I mean, yes, we've had this since The Exorcist, right? The Exorcist is really what made demons big business. It was a true blockbuster, which, for such a hardcore horror movie, surprised Warner Brothers incredibly with its success. It's also the movie which, by the way, and no pun intended, demonized the Ouija board, something else we talk about in the book. But yeah, Hollywood feeds into the demonic tropes, on a regular basis. Demons sell. I just saw Late Night with the Devil. I don't know if you've seen that. I think it's a phenomenal movie.
I did see it. I took my son, who's 15, to it, and we both really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done.
Excellent. Me too. And so it just goes to show that, the devil and demons are perpetually fascinating to us, and there are fresh takes on them coming all the time. What I love Hollywood takes on this because they're clearly labeled as fiction. What I have trouble with, an issue with, is those creators that are trying to pass off this kind of fear mongering as absolute fact. And there are consequences to that.
Yeah. Now I'm a practicing Catholic, and I think I've told you that before. And
Yeah.
so I don't subscribe that every negative perceived entity is demonic. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think you eloquently put in your book that if you were a bad person in life, if there's anything that persists after your bodily death of you and your consciousness, that it's probably not going to be the most pleasant for people to experience that. So I just don't see how a minion of the devil would be hanging out in an abandoned, decrepit old building, just waiting for a ghost hunting team to come and, do an Estes method. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, totally. I mean, if we posit from, and I respect, whether you're a Catholic or an agnostic, whatever your belief system, I respect your right to those beliefs.
Yeah.
And just from a purely kind of logical standpoint, if you are the minions of the Lord of Darkness, I can believe that you are out there fomenting mischief in the Middle East. I can believe that you are out there, working your evil in Washington, D.C., or wherever you can get the most bang for the buck.
Right.
I don't believe your time is going to be well spent in Jeff and Sheila's kitchen in Arkansas, especially if Jeff and Sheila are renting that house out for $400 a night. Which we're seeing more and more of, Mm-hmm. And so I'm not against paranormal tourism. I've seen it done very well. Places like Fort Mifflin use that revenue to keep the lights on and keep these historic places open. I think it's terrific when it's done ethically.
Sure.
On the other hand, I think we've also seen charlatanry in the field where individuals promote this demonic narrative based on no evidence whatsoever or the flimsiest of stories with the intent of bringing people in to, have a one-on-one encounter with the demonic. Are you brave enough? Are you tough enough? Can you puff your chest out enough to go provoke the demons? We've seen that on TV, and we're seeing it, seeing it all over YouTube and TikTok right now.
Oh, absolutely. I had a joke with a friend the other day. I was like, he was asking me like if, are ghosts real? And, just those typical things that a spooky guy is usually asked. And I said, I don't know. I would like to believe that something of us persists after bodily death. And there sure is a lot of stories out there for centuries and centuries all over the world that kind of collaborate some kind of existence of the paranormal. But it's demons being made almost as a scapegoat, yeah.
which traditionally has been their role. I mean, we talk about that somewhat in the book. The fact that, historically, demons were blamed. Go back to times of antiquity, demons were blamed. Your horse went lame with no explanation. A demon did it. A terrible earthquake took many. A demon did that too. You're not able to have children, you and your wife. A demon rendered, one or both of you impotent. They've made convenient scapegoats, and something that I did put in the book that I firmly believe is, we should look at fear. And it is far less terrifying to think of even the most horrific demon. Think about the nastiest thing Hollywood ever conjured up that came from the mind of a Hollywood special effects artist. Think about the worst, ugliest, nastiest monster like that. It is still less terrifying to the human psyche than the concept that we might, in fact, be all alone in a universe that is rudderless, with nobody at the wheel, and the bad things that happen to us are not caused by demons. They are completely random chance. Bad things happening to good people just because. That frightens me far more than Possession by Pazuzu or anything William Peter Blatty ever put on the page.
Yeah. Or Possession by Zozo, as you talk about it. Zozo, the 21st century demon. Mm-hmm. I had a funny conversation with Becky Galantine a couple episodes back.
Oh, love Becky. She's good people.
Very smart. Mm-hmm. Just brilliant. And she's a student of all these concepts, and she's very bright about the spirit board and a collector, and mm-hmm. she tries to, set the record straight about a lot of them, a lot of mm-hmm. the misconceptions of them. And I said, Becky, it seems to me like on a Ouija board, you're in the dark, your hands are placed upon it, and you're moving, the planchette's moving around, your fingers are moving across it, and you're hoping to communicate somewhere out there with something you can't see, and you hope, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, well, most people tonight, when they go to bed, they're going to take this device here and they're going to lay their hands upon it in the dark, and they're going to be moving their fingers upon it in hopes that they're communicating somehow out there with somebody that they hope to be benevolent, So like your cell phone, your touch screen could be much more of a sinister device or a portal or a gateway to evil than any kind of Parker Brothers spirit board or some kind of custom carved board that you might find at an antique sale.
Absolutely. There are numerous instances of, just cyberbullying and harassment, which the cell phone has enabled, which, far outstrip anything the Ouija board could ever put out there.
Yeah, for sure. Now, a second ago, you said something about like, there's no paranormal experts. And I kind of take a little bit of umbrage with that. And what I mean is that there are certainly those out there that study, and they go back to the Society for Psychical Research, and they read mm-hmm. the books of Harry Price, and they go back and they read Phantasms of the Living, and they do all this research. And so their expertise might be in the history and the study of parapsychology and things like that. Now,
that's fair. And we also have genuine parapsychologists like Dr. Kieran O'Keefe. But what I said was, I believe, unless I'm misremembering, that I can hear the sound of sharpening of claws at the concept. Right. Because that, once you put that idea out there of a paranormal expert, it is like a red rag to a bull, isn't it?
Right. And a lot of people will just claim themselves to be paranormal experts. And you had a thing in your book, you talk about how if one reads a book by the Warrens and they pay a fee and they write an essay, they too can be not licensed, but a certified or get a certificate in the mail to be a demonologist.
Well, you know who that happened to? That happened to Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, who is a genuine PhD parapsychologist, the closest thing we have to an ethical Peter Venkman out there. And he, by the way, he teaches an online course in demonology and its history and application, which is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I fully recommend taking it. But yeah, he said he decided to take one of these courses. And of course, developing courses is part of his forte. It's in his wheelhouse. And that was it. He was told, read this book, The Demonologist by Gerald Brittle, answer a few multiple choice questions, et voila, print out your certificate. You are now a demonologist.
Wow.
Which, as a paramedic by profession, Read this medical memoir, answer 10 questions, and go save lives. It's terrifying, isn't it?
I'm not going to do anything like that and then go try and suture a wound or attend to a gunshot victim or something like that for sure.
But it talks somewhat about speaks to the monetization of the field. And I'm always suspicious when money is to be gained or money is to change hands. And sometimes it does happen ethically, as I said, but quite often too, there are individuals that are out there to either make a buck or to aggrandize their own egos. And I think that a number of people have been hurt along the way by good faith, putting their trust in individuals like this.
There's a rush to judgment a lot of times in the paranormal. And I went over to a friend's house and they have a lovely dog. And the dog was very excited to see me. And it jumped up on me and scratched me with its paw. And so I think sometimes, like, if you go into a haunted location and, these phenomena happen when people get some kind of an injury or a scratch that they can't explain. And who's to say, I don't know if you should rush to judgment saying that it was a demon. Maybe it's some kind of spirit animal that's happy to see you, or a watchdog or something like that, that might just be too excited that somebody's finally visiting them and they get a little too excited.
I spy behind you a poster for one of your events, and it has the great John Tenney on it.
Yes.
Actually, two of them. John, not giving away any of his secrets because everyone should attend one of John's lectures in person. But one thing he does talk about is that cobwebby feeling almost every paranormal investigator has gotten in their hair or on their head, Brian, in a haunted location at some point or another, And John likes to put that out there. And he's like, who's had that experience? And many of us raise our hands. We've all had it, And then he will just say, ghost spiders. And the whole room is like, because it's terrifying. But there's a logic to that. You ask a room how many believe in ghost dogs, ghost cats. Yeah, absolutely. There are photographs. It's pretty well accepted.
Yeah.
There better be ghost dogs because I don't want to go to heaven. I want to go where the dogs go. That's my idea of a heaven. Sure. So it follows then that why shouldn't you have other animal spirits? Why shouldn't that scratch be a cat? Why shouldn't that growl be the spirit of a dog as opposed to a demon? Non-human does not equal demonic. It doesn't follow.
Yeah. So there's kind of that rush to judgment that everything that we encounter is either evil. And it kind of goes back to what you said, like this content. I'm not throwing content creators under the bus because there's a lot of great ones. My gosh.
There's some great ethical content creators out there. Absolutely.
For sure.
Becky Galentine being one of them.
Yeah, right on. But just this, like the rush to judgment and the YouTube video of everything's evil. Because, sex sells and evil sells too. Yeah. Now,
absolutely.
A great part of your book, like you delve into the medical explanations that could be explanations of demonic activity. Like you talk about, and with your paramedic experience, talking about people's conditions like, I don't know all the medical terminology, but you go through your book and you talk about and you interview medical experts in the field and how some symptoms could be psychological, there could be mental illness, and also some physiological things too. Like let's talk about that for a little bit because that's super interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, and throughout history, one case I looked at is the so-called Devils of Loudun, which, Aldous Huxley, of course, famously turned into a novel in, I want to say 1954. And then Ken Russell made the extremely controversial movie adaptation of it. This was a case in which a convent full of French nuns began showing signs ostensibly of demonic possession. And yet today it's widely regarded as probably a case of mass hysteria. There are cases in which patients undergo convulsions, full body convulsions, which again may be seizure-like activity, So we always have to consider the potential for undiagnosed epilepsy or non-epileptic seizures. There are a number of medical explanations for some, but by no means all of these cases of possession. And one area around which I tread lightly, but believe must be discussed is that of mental health. And I say that as someone who is a diagnosed depressive myself. Mental illness is something that we struggle with as a nation, and I would posit as a species, particularly these days. And so certainly historically, but I think even recently, you look at a number of cases, and clearly what's being dealt with is a behavioral crisis. Somebody that is undergoing an acute behavioral crisis and needs to get the appropriate treatment. Prior to authorizing an exorcism, the Catholic Church mandates that a psychological evaluation be performed and passed, as it were, on the individual, the potential ergumen, that is the possessed person, prior to an exorcism being authorized. So I always like to make that clear. Like Occam's razor would tell us that considering the potential for a behavioral crisis and mental emergency should be foremost in our minds before even approaching the possibility of possession. That being said, and I love the term devil's advocate in this case, individuals that do believe in demonic possession, sometimes they will suggest that if you are undergoing a bout of depression or mental illness, that may render you more vulnerable. It may lower your defenses, as it were. It certainly lowers your defenses to illness and plays a negative role on suppressing your immune system. So would that render you more vulnerable to demonic possession if there is such a thing? But certainly something to be considered as well.
Yeah. Now, also on the flip side, when you do a great job of describing like people that show like extraordinary strength, which is kind of a hallmark characteristic of somebody that might be under the oppression or infestation or possession of some kind of evil entity.
Yes.
Somebody that's emaciated, not eating well, that's been bedridden or like experiencing all this physical trauma wouldn't have the strength to do these things. So like you also flip it a little bit and say, well, how do we explain this? Which is another good, another thing I like about you. You're always looking at both sides. You're not just walking down one part of the path.
Thanks, Brian. That is the intent. I mean, a case that I didn't have space to cover in more detail is that of Annalise Michel, a tragic case in which this poor young lady was effectively starved to death as part of the process of exorcism. One thing we can state with confidence is exorcism provably kills more people than demonic possession ever did. The exorcism tragedies happen on an regular basis annually. But talking about the Erling, Iowa exorcism, that's something that really struck me. In the early stages, surges of adrenaline, of course, we've all heard the stories. There's a car accident and a mom finds her child pinned under the car, and she's lifting this car up with superhuman strength. That's adrenaline, right? It's not something you would do under ordinary circumstances. You need this hormonal booster in order to do it. But if you look at what happens to the human body when it becomes nutrient deprived, when it becomes malnourished, we're looking at exorcisms that took place over weeks and months. And we're looking at individuals like Anna Eklund / Emma Schmidt in Erling, who was refusing a lot of her food, was vomiting upwards of 15 to 20 times a day, that had diarrhea. This is not someone that's strong, that should be throwing grown men around. And yet, if the accounts are correct, that's exactly what happened. And I have no good physiologic explanation for how that would happen.
Another great aspect of the book that you bring up is practical magic. And I love the stories with your friend who is the professional magician, a former con man, also has medical training like yourself, just a real interesting character. And your interaction with him, it's a remarkable part of the book. I was like, I'm turning the page and now I'm reading about practical magic and how that might factor in. Very interesting how you included that.
Thank you. Yeah. He is a fascinating individual. His name's Aidan Sinclair. He was, as he will tell you, his story has been on television, a reformed con artist who did his time in jail, voluntarily turned himself in, learned magic in prison, went straight, teaches children how to not make the mistakes that he made. And he is the in-house resident illusionist at the Stanley Hotel and the RMS Queen Mary. He's been on Penn and Teller Fuller, so he has quite the pedigree. And I approached him wanting to know, if you're a world-class illusionist, could you fake the classic symptoms of possession? Could you do the levitation that we see in Blatty's version of The Exorcist that looks so impressive? Could you do that, though, in a room full of people? Could you have heads turning around and things of that nature? And so, he gave me a very practical answer. He said, as an illusionist, I could probably fake it until you get within 6 to 8 feet of me. And then you would start getting wind of the mechanisms I would need to build into beds and chairs and things like that, which was great. And then he blew me sideways by telling me about the time he was called in to consult on a case in Wyoming by the Catholic Church, in which he was asked to look for fraud to try and determine whether this was a genuine case of possession. And as a very skeptical man, a man who is not, I believe, a Christian by faith, it seemed like a case of, set a thief to catch a thief, send in an illusionist to see if trickery is afoot. And what he did that fascinated me was he took a St. Michael, one of those protective medallions, and he said that the lady that was allegedly possessed was fine at the onset of the evening, and as in so many cases, when night fell, became a different person and the possession took hold. It took multiple men to hold her down. And as they were doing so, and she was thrashing against them, sleight of hand is his forte, And so he slipped the St. Michael into her pillowcase. There's no way she could have seen it. There's no way she could have known what he'd done. She laid her head back on the pillowcase and then jerked it forwards as though she'd been burned.
Right.
And he said, I got no explanation for this. I don't know. She literally would have had to have had eyes in the back of her head. But every time her head came into contact with that spot on the pillow, she reacted as if stung. And he would not go so far as to say he believed it was a case of possession, but he said, I have no logical, rational, conventional explanation for what I experienced in that room, which fascinated me.
So there's a great part of the book. I'm not going to describe it in detail, but you were treated to a magical show that he does. And there is quite the card trick that you're a part of. And then after the show is over and everybody clears out and you had some special time together to kind of catch up as friends, you got the opportunity to put on gloves and to actually see quite the artifact of American paranormal, I guess, history, this diary, this Exorcist diary.
Yeah, this was on my 50th birthday, no less, a day that I will never forget for multiple reasons. And there is a picture of me, the one photograph of me in the book, looking shell-shocked, holding this diary, So what happened was that Aidan is a collector of all things, either occult or curios of that kind of magical bent. And he told me that he owned what is believed to be the diary of Father Bishop, one of the exorcists who performed the exorcism on Ronald Hunkeler, 1949, St. Louis, the boy, of course, on whom the Exorcist novel and movie were based. It is either the real deal or it's a very clever fake. I'm not entirely sure which, but he was willing to take it out of its I was going to say container. He stores it in his museum at the Stanley Hotel. So it lives in an alcove surrounded by protective St. Michael medallions and rosaries and things. He brought it out, having put on gloves. I was allowed to leaf through and actually read the handwritten notes from that exorcism in 1949, or at least what purport to be those notes. And it was just fascinating, this window into history. Into these events that we all know so well, right? I mean, we all know that iconic image of Max von Sydow standing under the light outside the building. People that have not seen the movie can tell you what that's from. So to be in the presence of that artifact was extremely surreal for me. And I won't spoil it, but I brought in a friend who is a psychic medium to engage in psychometry and to try and literally and figuratively read that diary and its energies.
Your book inspired me. I was doing a little bit of side research because I sit there with like your printed copy of the book, and then I got my phone or my iPad, and I'm like, well, first of all, sometimes I have to engage or I try to increase my vocabulary. So I'm like looking up different words or phrases and different times and different. I look at maps to see like where you're at, like where is this in relation to there, like when you're traveling across the country. And then I'm like, I started reading about Raymond Bishop, and lo and behold, I see that he was assigned to be a professor at Creighton University here in Omaha, and he's buried at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Omaha. So just the other day I went out. It was a beautiful fall day here in Omaha. The sun was shining, warm sunshine coming down, blue skies, and I walked across the priest circle where a lot of priests are buried here in Omaha. And then I paid respects to Father Raymond Bishop's grave right here in Omaha.
Did you feel a sense of connection in any way?
Not like really, but I did. I kind of kneeled down and I said a little prayer, just like I was just like, God bless you in your service. And you hope that all people that serve the community in the name of God do so with the noblest of intentions. And I have every reason to believe that he did. And so I was just like, I just thought it was remarkable that such a prominent figure in your book and a prominent movie like The Exorcist, based on a true story, based on true stories probably, that William Peter Blatty put together. But such a central figure is buried right in my hometown. And I'm almost 50 years old and I had no idea. Pretty interesting.
It's wonderful. The synchronicity and the timing of it was, I was really glad to see that when you posted it.
Yeah. And it was just right there. And it was a beautiful day. And I just was like, well, Father, I hope you found peace and everything that you were looking for in life. And it was extraordinary. Just knowing that it's just not too far, just right down the Leavenworth Street here in Omaha. So we've talked about, you've had paranormal experts, magicians, parapsychologists. You had mental health experts like the Karen Dahlman. Very interesting chapter about how she was, I'll let you explain it a little bit without giving too much away, but the concept of using the demon in a way almost to help somebody with mental difficulties, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So to members of the paranormal community, Karen's probably best known. I don't know if you've had her on the show. If not, I recommend it.
No, I have not.
And I can connect you. But Karen is known for her work with the Talking Board Historical Society, but in her everyday life, she is a licensed clinical therapist, and she worked with individuals who had DID, dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. And the personality, at least as she explained it to me, fragments usually due to very traumatic events at a young age. And in one of her particular clients, the dominant personality which would surface referred to itself as the demon and had a harsh, guttural, glottic voice that would fit that name. And so, it was very aggressive and combative. And Karen identified that this was actually a protective entity for the young lady in question, that her mind had essentially created this persona, this demonic persona, in order to protect her from further psychological harm. And once she ascertained that, Karen was actually able to engage the demon personality to work with it instead of opposing it for the benefit of her client, this disturbed young lady. And I just thought that was so not what I would have expected. Right. And that's why it had to go in the book, just the idea that a demon in that form, at least, was not a bad thing. In fact, quite the opposite.
Listeners, if you're listening to this and you are disappointed in the trajectory of this conversation, I want to apologize if you were thinking that this was just going to be scary stories or tales of woe. This is a book that is well researched. It's thoughtful, and it gives just such a grand, wide view of what demonic concepts could be, might not be. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting, and that's a great thing. Good. Because when I see the title Demon, I'm like, okay. But it also has the words Richard Estep on there. So I know it was going to be a well-rounded, very well-researched, just painstakingly written. I think you said it took you almost 3 years to put the final draft down until you felt comfortable with putting it out. Is that about right? About 3 years?
Absolutely, it did. I mean, just to go to all those places, have those experiences. And I appreciate what you say. I don't want it to seem like a bait and switch,
Right.
But there are plenty of books out there if you want to read unquestioning accounts of demonic possession, stuff like Hostage to the Devil, by Father Malachi Martin, things of that nature. There are plenty of books out there with white-eyed, soulless demons on the cover. And that's fine if that's what you want to read. I was interested in finding the level middle path of this book, in taking a kind of sober, almost clinical look at the evidence from a variety of angles. So I'm interested in the truth of this, not the fiction, which means this may not be the most appropriate spooky read for Halloween, but I really hope if you're in the paranormal community or just have an interest, it will make you rethink certain things and consider the possibility of demons in an entirely different light.
I love it. Richard, I from the moment I found your books, invited you on the program for the first time, like maybe 4 years ago, and interacted with you in person at Farrar and also at Malvern, you've just, to me, and I find you just to be one of the most important, like, modern day paranormal researchers, writers, and investigators that are out there, because you put out thoughtful, consistent content. It's like your books are great reads, and it's taught me what to kind of look for and what not, and how not to do paranormal investigating. You know, I use you as an example of trying to be open-minded, careful, thoughtful, and also you inspire people that follow you to be kind. And I think that's very important too.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate everything that you just said. If I have one regret in life, it's that I wish I'd been kinder for longer, you know. Not that I ever tried to stomp around being a monster, but to find those opportunities where, you know, a kind word can change somebody's day for the better. And I've come to appreciate the value of that in recent years. So now that I have a platform, I do try and share it. Thank you so much. That means a great deal to me to hear.
I absolutely mean it, man. Like, people will look back, and you might poo-poo this, but I mean, like, we look back on the important researchers of yesteryear, you know, like I don't know, you know, like people like Harry Price or Peter Underwood and things like that. But your books are important paranormal literature right now. I mean, I think everybody that's into this at all, into different locations, and are into history, because you talk a great deal about your investigations, but also you go to historic locations and you write a great deal about the people that were affected by tragedies. You write about people that lived in these places, people that lived in the era, and you really transport listeners to these places in a way with a kind of a flair and an uncommon touch that's with authors nowadays. So I'm really proud that you agreed to be on my show again. And it's been great getting to know you over the years and reading your books and supporting your work. Like I said earlier, I got a Richard Estep shelf over here that I need to probably either, expand with another piece of furniture, or at least shore up with a 2x4 so they don't collapse they don't collapse the shelf. But Richard, having you on the show once again, I really appreciate it. And my very best to you. I hope you have safe travels. I hope you take care of your truck as you make your way across the United States to all these locations. And I look forward to many more books that come out from your computer.
Thank you so much, Brian. And best of luck with the podcast. I hope our paths cross again next time I'm in the Midwest. I am sure that perhaps this time next year, you'll have me back on to discuss the follow-up to this book, which is now in process.
How many words do you write a day? Like, honestly, I have your book. I use it more of a reference than a straight through read about your the right life. Is that the right?
Building the right life. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you're a very prolific writer. You and like Troy Taylor. My goodness. How many words do you, as a goal, to try to write a day?
It's a minimum of 1,000 for me, which is 4 pages of the typical book. There are days when I don't write at all, and I usually feel bad. It feels like missing the gym to me, you know, and it's become something of a compulsion. So it's not always a good thing. I think a lot of writers are habitual, you know, they are compelled to write, and I'm that way. Some days like today, I wrote 3,000 words, 1,000 on 3 separate projects that I have going along. So it really varies. I don't believe in writer's block. I think that writer's block is life's way of trying to tell you are working on the wrong thing, and you should switch gears and write about something you're more passionate about.
That's very, very common with musicians too, because they'll sit there and beat their heads against the piano. Like, I can't get out of this verse. I can't get out of this chorus. I don't know the next. I can't turn a phrase, to get to the next part of the song. And it's like, well, what? Change gears and write another song. Like that writer's block. It's just a place to take a pause and then go to the next song. And then come back to it when you're fresh. Or maybe when you start composing something else, maybe you change the key and turn it into a hit. Who knows?
Just don't quit. If you're writing, just don't quit.
Just don't quit. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, it's been my pleasure to welcome to the show the great Richard Estep. Richard, my very best to you. Happy Halloween, and take care of yourself.
You too, my friend. Take care.
Well, there we go, everybody. Episode 285 with my friend and yours, the great Richard Estep. One of the leading voices, one of the leading authors and researchers in the paranormal, true crime history today. A gentleman, a scholar, hell of a guest. Next up on the Necronomicast, episode 286, it's my pleasure to welcome to the show Matt Murphy. He is a former senior deputy district attorney from Orange County, California, current legal analyst for ABC News in New York, spent 21 years assigned to sexual assault and homicide units. You've seen him on ABC, now listen to him on Necronomicast, all about his new book, The Book of Murder. It's not a how-to manual. It just documents his incredible career. And he's right here on Necronomicast. So, as I release this episode, it's Halloween. Have a fun, safe time. Get those full-size candy bars. Thank you for listening. We're going to close out the year on Necronomicast very strong. Anxious to jump into 2025, but a lot more coming your way. So I thank you for all the support. I hope you have a good night, a happy life. Now go get some sleep.